At my rich wife's lavish birthday dinner, she announced, "Dating down really puts life in perspective. Now I know what I don't want." Everyone laughed. I quietly got up, left $100 on the table, and drove home. She spent the night texting apologies. "Look, I'm not going to sugarcoat this whole mess for you, because honestly, life's too short, and I've got bills to pay. My name's Rowan Blake. I'm 35 years old, and before everything went sideways, I had what most people would call a decent life. Not Instagram-worthy, mind you, but solid. Real. The kind of life where you know what you're getting when you wake up in the morning, and you're okay with that. I'm a journeyman electrician. Yeah, one of those guys who actually knows how to fix stuff when your fancy smart home decides to have a nervous breakdown at 2 in the morning. Been doing it for 15 years now, and I've got my own small crew of 3 guys who show up on time, do the work, and don't spend half the day taking selfies with their tools. We handle everything from basic residential wiring to those massive commercial jobs where some architect thought it'd be cute to hide all the electrical work behind 17 layers of drywall and good intentions. You want to know what I like? Work boots that actually fit, books that don't have coffee stains on them, and honest-to-God quiet after a 12-hour shift where I've been crawling through attics that feel like the surface of Venus. Simple stuff. The kind of preferences that don't require a vision board or a life coach to figure out. I read, mostly nonfiction, some history, the occasional thriller when my brain's too fried for anything requiring actual thought. I've got a workshop in my garage where I restore old radios, because there's something satisfying about bringing dead things back to life with your hands instead of just throwing money at the problem. Then there's my wife. Oh boy, my wife. Sabrina Vale. And yes, she kept the veil because apparently that name opens more doors than a universal keycard. She's 32, beautiful in that way that looks effortless but probably costs more than my truck payment. And she's what you'd call rich. Not, I can afford the good cereal rich, but I genuinely don't know how much a banana costs rich. Old money from her dad's side. Something about shipping and railroads back when America was still figuring out which way was west. New money from her mom's side. Tech investments that hit big in the 90s and kept hitting. Sabrina runs this luxury events company called Veil and Verity, and let me tell you, watching her work is like watching a master class and turning other people's money into experiences they'll Instagram about for the next 6 months. She doesn't just plan parties. She creates immersive brand experiences and elevated lifestyle moments. I swear, she could make opening a can of beans sound like a spiritual journey. The woman's got a gift. I'll give her that. She can walk into a room full of people with more money than sense and convince them they need a 12-course dinner on a yacht to properly celebrate their dog's birthday. We've been married for 2 years now, which in her social circle is apparently still the honeymoon phase. Though honestly, some days it feels like we're speaking different languages. She'll be talking about curating authentic moments, and I'm over here trying to figure out why the garbage disposal sounds like it's summoning demons. But that's marriage, right? Learning to love someone whose idea of a crisis is running out of truffle oil while yours is discovering the main electrical panel is held together with electrical tape and prayers. Our home, and I use that term loosely because it feels more like a museum you're allowed to sleep in, is this glass and steel condo downtown with views that cost more than most people's houses. Seriously, the property taxes alone could fund a small school district. Floor-to-ceiling windows, minimalist furniture that looks like it was designed by aliens who've never actually sat down, and a kitchen so pristine I'm afraid to make toast in case I disturb the feng shui. The view is incredible, I'll admit that. On a clear day, you can see the whole city spread out below like a circuit board, all those lights and connections making sense from up here in a way they never do when you're down in the thick of it. But here's the thing about marrying into money. And nobody tells you this. Probably because it sounds ungrateful as hell. You start feeling like an actor who forgot to learn his lines. I brought what Sabrina calls stability to the relationship, which is a nice way of saying I know how to budget, fix things when they break, and show up when I say I will. She brought what I generously call sparkle, the connections, the lifestyle, the ability to turn a simple dinner into an event that requires a planning committee and a photographer. Her circle of friends is something else entirely. There's Harper, who inherited a cosmetics fortune and talks about disrupting the beauty space while selling $30 lip balm. Priya runs some sort of wellness empire that convinces wealthy women they need to drink clay smoothies to achieve inner peace. Luca's family owns half the commercial real estate in the city, but he calls himself an urban development visionary, like he discovered the concept of buildings. Jules is in fashion. Not making it, mind you, just talking about it very authoritatively while wearing clothes that cost more than my monthly mortgage. Remy's got a trust fund bigger than the GDP of small countries and spends his time investing in disruptive startups that mostly seem to disrupt his own bank account. And Tara? Tara's professional job is being married to someone who owns sports teams. They live in this world of soft lighting and hard opinions, where every conversation is a performance and every opinion is a brand statement. They can spend 2 hours debating the cultural significance of some chef's new tasting menu while completely missing the irony that they're paying $400 to eat portions you'd need a magnifying glass to find. It's like watching aliens try to figure out human behavior, except the aliens have unlimited credit cards and no sense of self-awareness. My strategy for surviving these people? Keep my head down, answer when directly asked, and try not to look like what I suspect they see me as, the blue-collar add-on. The guy who's here because Sabrina thought it would be interesting to try dating someone who owns exactly one pair of dress shoes and considers Olive Garden a legitimate dinner option. I smile, nod, and try to remember that these are the people my wife loves, which means they can't be completely terrible, right? Right? The truth is, before everything went to hell, I thought we were making it work. Sure, I felt out of place at their gallery openings and charity galas, but Sabrina always seemed happy. And isn't that what marriage is about? Compromise? Learning to love someone's world even when it doesn't quite fit? I figured we were just two people from different backgrounds trying to build something new together. Turns out I was half right about the different backgrounds part. The building something together part? Well, that's where this story gets interesting. Here's the thing about disrespect. It doesn't usually announce itself with a marching band and a neon sign. It starts small, like a hairline crack in your bathroom tile that you keep meaning to fix but never quite get around to. Before you know it, water's been seeping in for months, and suddenly your whole wall's rotting from the inside out. That's exactly how it started with Sabrina's crew, and like an idiot, I kept telling myself it was just the house settling. It didn't begin with outright cruelty, because these people are way too sophisticated for anything that obvious. No. It started with what they'd call playful banter and what I'd call death by 1,000 paper cuts. Picture this. We're at some gallery opening where the main attraction is literally a canvas painted entirely white that's somehow worth more than my annual income. And Harper pipes up with that laugh that sounds like champagne bubbles popping. Oh, Rowan's great with wires. Maybe we should have him install that new chandelier at the penthouse. Everyone chuckled like it was the most clever thing they'd ever heard. And I stood there with my overpriced craft beer, because God forbid I drink a Budweiser at these things, trying to figure out if I was supposed to laugh along or defend myself. The problem was, there wasn't really anything to defend against. Harper wasn't wrong. I am good with wires. But somehow, the way she said it made it sound like I was some kind of trained monkey who'd dance for their entertainment if they just jingled the right keys. Then came the upgrade comments, and let me tell you, these people could spot something that needed improving from 3 blocks away with their eyes closed. My truck, a perfectly reliable F-150 that's gotten me to every job site for the past 8 years without complaint, suddenly became this ongoing source of concern for everyone. Rowan, have you thought about maybe something more sleek? Priya would ask, like she was genuinely worried about my transportation situation. I mean, with all the success of Veil and Verity, surely you could consider something with a little more presence? My watch, a Timex my dad gave me when I finished my apprenticeship, was apparently charming in that vintage way, according to Luca, who wore a Rolex that cost more than some people's cars. Jules had opinions about my beer choices, suggesting I might want to explore some craft options, as if my Stella Artois was somehow holding back my personal growth. And don't even get me started on Remy's helpful suggestion that I might want to consider some wardrobe consultation, because apparently my idea of dressing up, clean jeans, and a button-down shirt that actually fits, wasn't quite cutting it in their sophisticated circles. The worst part? Sabrina's reaction to all this helpful criticism. She'd do this thing where she'd quickly change the subject, like she was protecting me from their well-meaning advice. and I was stupid enough to mistake that silence for defense. I actually thought she was on my side, running interference between me and her friend's relentless campaign to turn me into someone more suitable for their Instagram feeds. Looking back, I realized she wasn't defending me at all. She was just embarrassed by the whole situation and trying to make it go away as quietly as possible. Her mother Marcella was a masterclass in passive-aggressive warfare disguised as maternal wisdom. This woman could deliver an insult so wrapped up in concern and social etiquette that you'd thank her for it. Opposites attract, she'd say with that smile that never quite reached her eyes, pausing just long enough for the words to hang in the air like a question mark, at first. Then she'd pat my arm in that way people pet dogs they're not sure won't bite, and launch into some story about her charity work that somehow always involved people who knew their place in the world. Graham, Sabrina's father, was more straightforward in his skepticism, which I actually preferred to Marcella's surgical precision. He'd shake my hand like he was testing a grip he didn't trust, holding on just a beat too long while his eyes did this quick inventory of everything I was wearing, everything I was driving, everything I represented that didn't quite add up in his mental spreadsheet. The man had turned measuring people into an art form, and I could practically see him running calculations in his head. Electrician plus small business plus pickup truck equals what exactly is my daughter thinking? I told myself it was just culture clash, you know? Like when you're the only person at a party who doesn't get the inside joke, but you laugh anyway because you don't want to seem like a buzzkill. These people spoke a different language, one where everything was a performance and every opinion was a strategic positioning statement. They didn't just like things, they curated experiences. They didn't have problems, they had opportunities for growth. They didn't buy stuff, they made investments in their lifestyle brand. But here's the thing about culture, when it gets repeated often enough, it stops being quirky differences and starts becoming hierarchy. And guess where I ranked on that particular organizational chart? Somewhere between the guy who delivers their organic groceries and the person who details their cars. Useful, necessary even, but definitely not management material. I felt it most acutely at those dinner parties where the conversation would flow around topics I had no reference point for. Which private school was better for developing global consciousness? Whether the new chef at whatever five-star restaurant was maintaining his vision with the seasonal menu changes, or which charity gala was worth attending for the networking opportunities. I'd sit there nodding along, contributing when I could, but mostly feeling like I was watching a play performed in a language I was still learning. And then there was the money thing. Oh man, the money thing. See, here's what nobody tells you about dating someone wealthy. The money follows you around like a friendly but slightly aggressive dog. It wants to help. It wants to make things easier. It wants to solve problems you didn't even know you had. The problem is, when your wife's credit card could literally buy the restaurant you're sitting in, and everyone knows it, suddenly every check becomes a statement about who you are and what you can afford. I can't tell you how many times I'd reach for my wallet, ready to split a bill or pick up my share, only to have someone wave me off with that patronizing smile and say something like, "Don't worry about it. This one's on us." Or worse, "Let Sabrina handle it." This is basically pocket change for her. Then came the real kicker. The nights when they'd actually let me pay, calling it a gentlemanly gesture, like I was some kind of performing seal they'd trained to do tricks with my debit card. The thing that really got to me wasn't the money itself. I've never been broke, and I make decent cash doing honest work. It was the assumption that because my bank account had fewer zeros, I was somehow grateful just to be included in their expensive little world. Like I should be thankful for the privilege of buying overpriced cocktails for people who thought my life was a charming novelty. You know how some nights feel important before they even start? Like the universe is setting up pins just to knock them down with a bowling ball made of pure chaos? That was Sabrina's 32nd birthday party, though at the time I thought I was walking into a celebration, not a public execution with hors d'oeuvres and a live soundtrack. Le Jardin Atrium isn't just a restaurant. It's what happens when someone with unlimited resources decides that eating dinner should feel like performing in a Broadway show. The place screams money, so loud you need earplugs just to read the menu. We're talking orchids that probably cost more than my monthly truck payment, positioned like they're guarding state secrets. Mirrored pillars that multiply everything by infinity, which sounds romantic until you realize there's literally nowhere to hide when things go sideways. The lighting is that perfect golden hour glow that makes everyone look like they're starring in their own biographical documentary about being fabulous. And the champagne tower? Jesus, the champagne tower. This thing was tall as a promise and twice as fragile, with glasses stacked so high I half expected someone to plant a flag at the top and claim it for France. Each flute caught the light like a tiny crystal prison, and I found myself wondering who the hell was responsible if that whole architectural nightmare decided to gravity itself all over the marble floor. Spoiler alert, probably me somehow. 60 guests showed up, which in Sabrina's world means 60 people who all know each other's net worth, relationship status, and current level of social media influence. These weren't just friends coming to wish someone happy birthday. This was a gathering of the tribe, a chance for everyone to see and be seen while consuming food that cost more per bite than most people spend on lunch. The guest list read like a who's who of people who'd never had to worry about overdraft fees or wonder if they could afford the good toilet paper. There was a photographer, because of course there was. Some artsy guy with deliberately messy hair and pants so tight I worried about his circulation, who kept appearing at angles I didn't know existed to capture authentic moments of people being authentically artificial. Every conversation became a potential photo op, every laugh timed for maximum visual impact. I watched people adjust their posture mid-sentence when they spotted his camera, transforming from normal humans into Instagram-ready versions of themselves faster than you could say Valencia filter. The gift bags alone were heavier than my tool roll, which should have been my first warning that this wasn't going to be your average birthday dinner. I peeked inside one when nobody was looking and found stuff that probably cost more than I spend on groceries in a month. Fancy candles, artisanal chocolate, some kind of face cream that claimed to contain actual gold. 60 gift bags times whatever insane amount each one cost. I stopped doing the math because it was making my head hurt. Sabrina wore this liquid silver dress that moved like mercury and caught every light in the room. She didn't just wear it, she inhabited it, like the fabric had been specifically designed to showcase her particular brand of effortless perfection. Her hair was done in one of those styles that looks simple but probably required a team of engineers and a structural assessment. The attention followed her around the room like a loyal pet, and I have to admit, watching her work that crowd was like watching a master craftsman practice their trade. I stood beside her and smiled, playing my role as the supportive husband who definitely belonged in this glittering circus of wealth and social positioning. I'd practiced this smile in the mirror that morning, genuine enough to look real, but not so wide that it screamed, "I'm completely out of my element and terrified someone's going to ask me about my portfolio." I shook hands, made small talk about the weather and the excellent turnout, and tried to look like a man who regularly attended events where the flower arrangements had their own lighting designer. The party planner, Micah, was everywhere and nowhere at once, appearing with the kind of precision timing that suggested either supernatural powers or really good Bluetooth earpieces. She gave subtle cues to the staff. A slight nod here, a barely visible gesture there, and suddenly waiters would glide past with fresh champagne, or the perfect appetizer would materialize in front of someone who looked like they might be getting hungry. It was like watching a choreographed dance where everyone knew the steps except me. The staff moved like quiet swans, if swans wore black uniforms, and had supernatural abilities to anticipate rich people's needs before the rich people even knew they had them. They appeared when you needed them and vanished when you didn't, only perfectly clean glasses and the vague impression that maybe you'd imagined the whole interaction. These weren't just servers. They were hospitality ninjas, trained in the ancient art of making wealthy people feel even wealthier by comparison. The room pulsed with money in a way that was almost physical. You could feel it in the weight of conversations about vacation homes and art collections, in the casual mentions of charity boards and exclusive clubs, in the way people talked about $1,000 problems like they were minor inconveniences. It wasn't that they were showing off. Well, not exactly. It was more like they lived in a world where certain assumptions about wealth and access were so fundamental that they didn't even register as assumptions anymore. I told myself to be gracious, to be present, to be proud of my wife who had created this beautiful, expensive moment for herself and everyone she cared about. And I was proud, genuinely. Watching Sabrina command that room, seeing how people genuinely enjoyed being around her, recognizing the skill and effort that had gone into creating an evening that everyone would remember. There was something admirable about it, even if it wasn't my world. But there was also something else happening, something I couldn't quite name at the time. It was in the way conversations paused when I joined them, then resumed on slightly different topics. It was in the polite but distant smiles I got from people I'd met multiple times before. It was in the feeling that I was being tolerated rather than welcomed, accepted as Sabrina's plus one rather than recognized as someone who might have value independent of my relationship to her. The evening had this perfect, glossy surface that reflected everything beautifully while revealing nothing underneath. Every detail was curated, every moment designed for maximum impact, every interaction calibrated for the right mix of warmth and sophistication. It was gorgeous and hollow at the same time, like a movie set designed to look like a party rather than an actual party where people were genuinely celebrating someone they cared about. You ever notice how the moment before everything goes to hell usually feels perfectly normal? Like the universe has this twisted sense of humor where it lulls you into thinking you're safe, maybe even having a good time, right before it drops the anvil on your head? That's exactly what those first toasts felt like, a warm-up act for a show I didn't know I was about to star in. The toast started after the main course, which was some kind of fish that probably had a more impressive resume than half the people in the room. We're talking about a piece of sea bass that had been lovingly prepared by a chef whose name appeared in magazines, plated like a piece of modern art, and served with vegetables so artfully arranged they looked like they were posing for their own portrait. I ate it and nodded appreciatively, because that's what you do when your wife's birthday dinner costs more than most people's rent. Harper kicked things off, rising from her seat with the kind of graceful confidence that comes from never having to worry about saying the wrong thing at the wrong time. Her champagne flute caught the light as she held it up, and suddenly the entire room focused on her like she was about to deliver the State of the Union address. To Sabrina, she began, and you could practically hear the collective intake of breath as 60 people prepared to hang on her every word. Sabrina has always been the most brilliant person in any room she enters, Harper continued, and I found myself nodding because, honestly, it wasn't wrong. My wife is scary smart in ways that make me grateful we're on the same team. Her vision for Veil and Verity has revolutionized how we think about luxury experiences. She doesn't just plan events, she creates memories that last lifetimes. The room murmured its agreement, glasses clinked, and I clapped along because you don't not applaud when someone's praising your wife's professional accomplishments. Even if you sometimes feel like you're applauding from the cheap seats while everyone else has box tickets. Priya went next, launching into this whole thing about Sabrina's fearless authenticity and her ability to manifest her vision into reality through sheer force of will and impeccable taste. It was the kind of speech that sounded profound, but also kind of like something you'd read on a motivational poster in a boutique hotel lobby. Still, she meant it, and watching Sabrina's face light up with genuine pleasure made me happy in that simple way you get when someone you love is being appreciated. Then Lucas stood up, and this is where things started to get that weird energy that makes the hair on your arms stand up for reasons you can't quite explain. He's got this voice that carries, probably from years of boardroom meetings where his opinion carried the weight of his family's real estate empire. What I love about Sabrina, he said, swirling his wine like he was conducting an orchestra, is her absolute commitment to excellence. She knows what she wants, and she's never afraid to go after it. More applause, more nodding, more of that collective agreement that happens when rich people recognize quality in each other. But there was something in the way he said, knows what she wants, that felt loaded, like a gun with the safety off. I glanced around the table and caught Jules exchanging a look with Remy that lasted about half a second too long. You know that feeling when you walk into a room and you can tell people were just talking about you? It was like that, but nobody had left the room. Tara raised her glass and talked about Sabrina's evolution as a tastemaker and cultural influencer, which was a fancy way of saying she was good at getting other rich people to spend money on things they didn't know they wanted. She's always been ahead of the curve, Tara said, but this year has really been about refinement, about understanding not just what she can have, but what she should have. That last bit hung in the air like smoke from a grease fire, and I felt something twist in my stomach that had nothing to do with the artisanal bread or the wine that probably cost more per bottle than I spend on groceries in a week. I looked at Sabrina, who was beaming with that particular glow people get when they're being publicly appreciated by their peers. But there was something else in her expression, something that looked almost like anticipation. The speeches kept coming, each one building on the same themes. Sabrina's brilliance, her vision, her success, her ability to elevate everything and everyone around her. And woven through all of it was this repeated note about knowing what she wants, about growth and evolution and refinement. It was like listening to a song where you can't quite make out the lyrics, but you're starting to recognize the melody, and it's not one you particularly like. Jules stood up and delivered this whole monologue about Sabrina's journey toward authentic self-expression and how inspiring it was to watch someone shed the things that no longer serve them in pursuit of their highest self. The way she said it, with that particular emphasis on things that no longer serve, made me wonder if we were still talking about event planning or if there was a different conversation happening that I wasn't quite picking up on. Remy's toast was about brave choices and the courage to prioritize personal growth over social expectations, which sounded supportive until you started wondering what exactly needed courage and what social expectations were being bucked. The whole time he was talking, he kept glancing in my direction with this expression that was probably meant to be friendly, but felt more like someone watching a car accident in slow motion. I clapped for every toast because that's what you do. I smiled because that's what's expected. I raised my glass when everyone else raised theirs because I'm not an asshole who ruins his wife's birthday party by being a buzzkill. But with each speech, each carefully crafted compliment, each round of applause, I felt like I was watching a play where I was the only person who hadn't read the script. The weird thing is, I genuinely meant it when I applauded. Sabrina is brilliant, and she has built something impressive with Veil and Verity. She does know what she wants, and she's not afraid to go after it. These weren't lies or empty flattery. They were truths being delivered in a way that felt like they came with footnotes I wasn't allowed to read. And through it all, Sabrina glowed. She accepted each compliment with grace, laughed at the inside jokes, and basked in the attention like someone who had been waiting all year for this particular moment of recognition. She looked beautiful and confident and completely in her element, surrounded by people who understood her world in ways I was starting to realize I maybe never would. But there was something else in her demeanor, something that made me think of a performer waiting for their cue to deliver the big number everyone had been waiting for. Time slows down in the weirdest moments, you know? Like when you're about to get in a car accident, and suddenly you can see every detail. The way the light hits the other driver's windshield, the exact angle of their front bumper, the split second when you realize there's absolutely nothing you can do to stop what's about to happen. That's exactly how it felt when Sabrina rose from her chair, champagne flute in hand, and I knew with the kind of bone-deep certainty that comes from nowhere and everywhere at once that whatever was about to happen was going to change everything. She didn't just stand up, she rose, like some kind of goddess ascending to deliver wisdom from on high. The room didn't just quiet down. It went dead silent in that way that only happens when everyone collectively holds their breath. Even the servers froze mid-step, probably sensing that whatever was about to unfold was the kind of moment that gets talked about for years afterward. The photographer lowered his camera slightly, like even he knew this wasn't something you capture with a lens. Sabrina owned that room in a way that was both beautiful and terrifying to watch. She had this smile that could have powered the city grid, and her eyes swept across the faces of her friends with the confidence of someone who knew exactly what she was about to do and was absolutely certain it was going to land exactly the way she intended. This wasn't improvisation. This was a performance she'd been rehearsing in her head, maybe for weeks. "Thank you all for being here tonight," she began, and her voice carried that particular blend of warmth and authority that made people lean forward in their seats. "It's been such an incredible year, and having all of you here to celebrate with me. It means everything." She paused, letting the sentiment settle, and I found myself nodding along because it was sweet and genuine and exactly the kind of thing you'd expect someone to say at their birthday party. But if I'm being honest, and when am I not honest with you all? This has been more than just another year. It's been a year of real growth, a year of clarity. The way she said clarity made something cold crawl up my spine, but I pushed it down because this was my wife's moment and I was determined to be supportive. A year of understanding not just what I want, but what I deserve. The room was hanging on her every word now. 60 people who knew Sabrina well enough to recognize when she was building towards something big. I could feel the collective anticipation like electricity in the air, that moment before lightning strikes when all the hair on your body tries to stand up at once. She turned slightly, just enough that I was in her direct line of sight, and that smile of hers took on a different quality. Still beautiful, still confident, but with an edge that made me think of surgical instruments. Precise, sharp, designed to cut clean. You know, they say you learn the most about yourself when you step outside your comfort zone. When you try new things. A few people chuckled knowingly, and I felt that first flutter of real unease, like when you're walking on what you think is solid ground and suddenly realize you're on ice that's been cracking for miles. But I kept that supportive husband smile plastered on my face because what else was I supposed to do? Start a fight at my wife's birthday party in front of 60 witnesses and a photographer? And this year, I definitely tried some new things. She paused for effect, and I swear I could hear my own heartbeat over the silence. I experimented with different flavors, different experiences, different types of people. The laughter started low, just a few knowing chuckles from her inner circle, but it was growing. Harper had this expression like she was watching her favorite movie, and Jules was practically vibrating with anticipation. Even the people at the far tables were leaning in now, sensing that whatever was coming was going to be worth remembering. Dating down, Sabrina continued, and those two words hit me like a physical blow. Really puts life in perspective. The world went sideways. Not metaphorically, literally sideways, like someone had tilted the entire restaurant 30 degrees and forgotten to warn me. My ears started ringing with that high-pitched whine you get after standing too close to speakers at a concert. And for a second I wondered if I was having some kind of medical emergency, because surely my wife of 2 years, the woman I'd stood beside through family dinners and charity galas and late-night talks about building a future together, surely she hadn't just said what I thought she'd said. But she wasn't done. Of course she wasn't done. Now I know what I don't want. The silence that followed was different from the anticipatory quiet of moments before. This was the silence of a room full of people who'd just watched someone detonate a bomb and were still processing the blast radius. I could actually hear the champagne bubbles popping in glasses, the whisper of expensive fabric as people shifted in their seats, the barely audible hum of the sound system that nobody had noticed until now. Then came the laughter. Not the warm, celebratory laughter of friends enjoying a party, but something sharper, more vicious. The kind of laughter that draws blood. It started with a few scattered chuckles, grew into genuine amusement, and finally exploded into full-throated appreciation for what they clearly saw as the punchline of the century. Luca was the first to break the spell, his voice cutting through the laughter like a knife through silk. Savage. He said it with the kind of admiration you'd reserve for a particularly brutal chess move or a perfectly timed insult. This wasn't shock at Sabrina's cruelty. This was appreciation for her technique. Priya's voice followed, humming with satisfaction. Truth in jest. Like we were watching a comedy special instead of my marriage imploding in real time. The quartet, the actual string quartet that had been providing elegant background music all evening, stopped playing. Even they knew when they were witnessing something that didn't need a soundtrack. The photographer, who had been documenting every moment of this perfect evening, kept shooting. Click, 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 capturing the exact moment my wife turned me into a punchline for 60 of her closest friends. And Sabrina? Sabrina didn't flinch. She held that room like a conductor commanding an orchestra, her face serene and satisfied, like someone who had just solved a particularly challenging puzzle. She didn't look at me, didn't need to. The reaction she was getting from everyone else was confirmation enough that her performance had landed exactly as intended. The thing that broke my heart wasn't the words themselves, though they cut deep enough to leave scars. It was the calculation behind them, the premeditation, the way she'd turned our marriage into material for her entertainment. This wasn't a slip of the tongue or a joke that went too far. This was a planned execution, carried out with surgical precision in front of an audience that had been primed to appreciate the show. Here's what they don't tell you about those moments when your world gets turned inside out in front of 60 witnesses. Your body keeps working even when your brain has basically blue-screened and is displaying nothing but static. My hands didn't shake. My voice didn't crack. My face didn't crumple into the kind of expression that would give Sabrina's photographer even more ammunition for whatever narrative was being crafted here. Sometimes survival instincts kick in when you least expect them, and mine apparently involved turning into the most composed version of myself I'd ever been. I didn't argue. What would have been the point? Stand up and deliver some passionate defense of our marriage while everyone sat there with their champagne and their knowing smiles, waiting to see how the blue-collar guy would handle being publicly humiliated by his rich wife? Give them the satisfaction of watching me lose my shit and prove every stereotype they'd probably been harboring about people like me? No thanks. I'd rather eat glass. I didn't plead, either, though part of me, the part that still couldn't quite believe this was actually happening, wanted to. That part wanted to grab Sabrina's hand and ask her what the hell she thought she was doing. Remind her of every late-night conversation we'd had about building something real together. Make her explain how 2 years of marriage had somehow been reduced to a punchline about dating down. But pleading would have required believing there was something to salvage here, and watching her face in the aftermath of her little performance had killed that possibility deader than roadkill. I didn't make a speech, either, even though every movie I'd ever seen suggested this was the moment for some grand declaration about dignity and self-respect. But this wasn't a movie, and these people weren't an audience that gave a damn about character development or moral victories. They were here for entertainment, and I'd already provided more than enough of that for one evening. Instead, I reached for my wallet with the kind of deliberate calm that comes from years of working with electrical current. One wrong move, and everything goes to hell. So you better make sure every gesture is exactly what you intend it to be. My fingers found the bills without looking, muscle memory from countless dinners and drinks and social obligations where I'd insisted on paying my share even when everyone knew Sabrina could have bought the entire establishment without checking her bank balance. I placed a crisp $100 bill beside my plate, right next to the remnants of that overpriced fish and the untouched dessert that had been delivered during Sabrina's performance. $100, enough to cover my meal, my drinks, the service charge, and a tip generous enough that nobody could say I'd stiffed the staff who'd spent the evening making sure we all felt like royalty. It was probably more than my portion of the bill actually cost, but I wanted to be absolutely certain there would be no confusion about my ability to handle my own financial responsibilities. The sound of the bill hitting the table was barely audible over the residual murmur of conversation and the nervous laughter still echoing around the room, but it felt loud as thunder to me. Final as a judge's gavel. Clean as a surgical cut. Then I stood up, and it was like someone had pressed the pause button on the entire universe. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Wine glasses froze halfway to lips. Even the servers, who had probably witnessed more rich people drama than a reality TV producer, seemed to sense that whatever was happening here was worth paying attention to. To clarity, I said, and my voice came out steady and clear, carrying just far enough to reach the people at the nearest tables without me having to raise it like I was delivering a soliloquy. 2 words that managed to acknowledge Sabrina's little toast, while making it clear I understood exactly what kind of clarity we were talking about here. The reaction was immediate and uncomfortable. Chairs scraped against the floor as people shifted positions, suddenly fascinated by their napkins, or the view out the window, or literally anything that wasn't the sight of a man walking away from his wife at her own birthday party. A few guests stared at their hands like they were reading tea leaves, probably hoping they could disappear into their palm lines and avoid witnessing whatever social catastrophe was unfolding in front of them. Harper, who had kicked off this whole evening with her toast about Sabrina's brilliance, whispered my name like she was trying to call me back from the edge of a cliff. Rowan. It came out soft and tentative, maybe the first genuine emotion I'd heard from her all evening. Too little, too late, but at least it was something resembling human decency. I walked out past the orchids that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary, past the champagne tower that had somehow managed to survive the evening intact despite my earlier concerns about gravity and expensive glassware, past the mirrored pillars that multiplied my exit into infinity, creating an endless parade of Rowans walking away from endless versions of this nightmare scenario, past the photographer who finally, lowered his camera, apparently recognizing that some moments weren't meant to be captured for posterity. The walk to the exit felt both eternal and instantaneous, Like one of those dreams where you're trying to reach a destination, but the hallway keeps stretching out in front of you. Every step echoed in the sudden quiet of the room, and I could feel 60 pairs of eyes tracking my movement like I was some kind of exotic animal they'd never seen before. The guy who walked away. The husband who didn't fight back. The blue-collar add-on who knew when he'd been dismissed. In the valet circle outside, the night air hit my face like a slap, cold and honest, and completely free of the expensive perfume and pretension that had been choking me for the past 3 hours. The city looked different from out here, more real somehow, like someone had adjusted the contrast, and suddenly everything was in sharp focus again. The valet driver brought my truck around with the kind of professional courtesy that suggested he'd seen plenty of dramatic exits from Le Jardin Atrium and knew better than to ask questions. He handed me the keys like I was still worthy of basic human respect, which was more consideration than I'd gotten from my wife's friends all evening. I drove home in complete silence, windows down despite the cold, letting the city steal the smell of overpriced food and other people's money from my clothes. The highway stretched out ahead of me like a promise, and for the first time all evening, I could breathe without feeling like I was drowning in someone else's expectations. You know that feeling when you've been holding your breath underwater for too long and you finally break the surface? That's what driving away from Le Jardin Atrium felt like. Like I could finally fill my lungs with actual air instead of the suffocating mixture of expensive cologne and social performance I'd been choking on all evening. But the universe, apparently, had other plans for my moment of peace. I hadn't even hit the expressway when my phone started buzzing like an angry wasp trapped in a jar. The sound cut through my truck's speakers with the kind of insistence that suggested someone was having what they considered to be an emergency. I glanced at the display and saw Sabrina's name lighting up the dashboard like a neon sign advertising trouble. The irony wasn't lost on me. My wife, who had just finished explaining to 60 people why she was done slumming it with the electrician, was now calling said electrician like her life depended on it. I declined the call, not out of spite, exactly, but because I genuinely couldn't think of a single thing she could say that would make this situation any better, and I was pretty sure she could make it a whole lot worse. The phone went quiet for about 30 seconds, just long enough for me to think maybe she'd gotten the message, then started buzzing again. Sabrina, round 2. Declined again. By the time I merged onto the expressway, the text messages had started flooding in like a broken dam. My phone kept pinging with that particular sound that means someone is having a full-scale meltdown in your message app, and each notification felt like a tiny electric shock to my already fried nervous system. Babe, I was joking. That was the first one, arriving with the kind of casual dismissiveness that made my jaw clench hard enough to crack teeth. A joke. 2 years of marriage reduced to a punchline, delivered in front of everyone we knew, and her defense was that it was a joke. Like I was supposed to laugh along with everyone else about being turned into entertainment for her rich friends. You know how this crowd is. Oh, I knew how this crowd was, all right. I'd spent 2 years learning exactly how this crowd was, watching them turn every interaction into a performance and every relationship into a transaction. What I apparently hadn't known was that my wife considered herself part of this crowd, in a way that made me fundamentally separate from it. Don't be dramatic. This one actually made me laugh, though there wasn't much humor in it. Right, because walking away quietly after being publicly humiliated was the height of drama. I should have stayed, apparently, smiled and clapped along while my wife explained to her friends why marrying me had been such an educational experience in what not to do with your life. Answer me. The messages were getting shorter and more demanding now, like she was issuing commands instead of apologies. I could practically hear the frustration in those 2 words, the barely contained anger that I wasn't playing my part in whatever script she'd written for how this evening was supposed to go. I'm sorry. Too little, too late, and arriving with the kind of timing that suggested it was more about damage control than actual remorse. Sorry for what, exactly? Sorry for saying it. Or sorry I'd reacted badly to being turned into a cautionary tale about the dangers of dating beneath your social station. Come back. This one was almost funny in its complete misunderstanding of the situation. Come back to what? More champagne and explanations about how I'd misunderstood her little performance? A chance to sit there while her friends dissected our relationship like a biology lab experiment? But Sabrina wasn't the only one flooding my phone with urgent communications. Apparently, word of my dramatic exit had spread through the Vale family network faster than gossip at a high school reunion, because suddenly I was hearing from the whole clan. Marcella's message arrived with the kind of icy precision I'd come to expect from Sabrina's mother. You embarrassed Sabrina. Not, there was a misunderstanding, or perhaps we should talk. Just a flat accusation that I had somehow been the one causing embarrassment by refusing to sit there and take my public humiliation with a smile. Classic Marcella. Never miss an opportunity to make it clear that any problems in the family were obviously caused by the outsider who didn't know his place. Graham's message was even more direct. Call me. Two words that managed to convey both authority and threat in equal measure. I could practically hear his voice delivering that command, probably from the leather chair in his home office where he conducted the family business of making sure everyone stayed in their assigned roles. The man who had never trusted my handshake was now demanding a conversation, and I had a pretty good idea it wasn't going to be about how much he'd enjoyed my company at dinner. Even Jules chimed in, because apparently my marriage was now everybody's business. She didn't mean it like that. How exactly had she meant it then? Was there some secret interpretation of dating down that I'd missed in my working-class education? Some nuanced way to explain to a room full of people that your husband had been a learning experience you were ready to graduate from? The messages kept coming as I drove through the city, each ping another little reminder that 60 people had just watched my wife explain why I'd been a mistake she was ready to correct. Friends, family, people who barely knew me but apparently felt qualified to offer commentary on my reaction to being publicly declared inadequate for continued membership in the Vale family social circle. At home, I sat at my kitchen table, my actual kitchen table, the one I'd bought with my own money from a furniture store that didn't require a family trust fund to shop at, and put my phone face down on the surface. The silence felt like a luxury after an evening of performing for people who saw me as background scenery in their glittering social drama. 10 minutes later, the security camera chimed with that particular sound that meant someone was at the front door. I didn't need to check the feed to know who it was. Sabrina's silver dress had probably set off every motion detector in the building. Rowan, open, please. Her voice came through the intercom with a quality I'd never heard before, something that might have been actual desperation underneath all that Vale family breeding. I didn't answer. I sat at my table and listened to my wife pleading with a piece of electronic equipment to let her back into a life she'd just finished explaining to 60 people wasn't worth her time anymore. She sat on the hallway bench for a while. I could see her on the security feed, still in that liquid silver dress, still beautiful, still completely missing the point of why I wasn't opening the door. When she finally left, I felt something I hadn't expected, relief. Morning came whether I wanted it to or not, which is one of those universal truths that doesn't give a damn about your personal drama. I woke up in my own bed. Our bed, technically, though it felt more like mine after spending the night alone. And for about 30 seconds, I wondered if the whole evening had been some kind of stress-induced nightmare. Then I saw my dress shirt draped over the chair where I'd thrown it, still smelling faintly of overpriced orchids and social catastrophe, and reality came flooding back like cold water to the face. My phone had apparently been busy all night, accumulating messages like a digital snowball rolling downhill. More texts from Sabrina, a few missed calls from numbers I didn't recognize, and even a voicemail from Harper that I deleted without listening to because I'd already heard enough from that crowd to last me several lifetimes. But the real entertainment started around 9 in the morning, when Sabrina apparently decided that yesterday's approach of panicked apologies wasn't working and it was time to try a different strategy. Enter the spin cycle, where everything that happened last night gets put through the public relations washing machine until it comes out clean and fresh, and somehow not at all what you thought you witnessed. It was a brand joke, read the first text of the morning, delivered with the kind of confident authority that suggested she'd spent the night workshopping this explanation with a focus group. A brand joke. Like our marriage was just another element of her carefully curated public image, and last night's performance had been some kind of calculated marketing move designed to, what, exactly? Show her clients that she was edgy enough to humiliate her own husband for entertainment value? People expect sharp lines from me. Came the follow-up, as if explaining that cruelty was part of her professional skill set somehow made it more acceptable. I sat there reading this at my kitchen table, drinking coffee from a mug that said, "World's okayest electrician." A gag gift from my crew that had become my favorite piece of dishware, and marveling at the sheer audacity of turning last night's character assassination into a career requirement. The third message really sealed the deal. I panicked. Right, because nothing says panic like a carefully delivered speech that hit every note perfectly and landed exactly as intended. Because nothing says loss of control like holding a room of 60 people in the palm of your hand while you explain why your husband had been such an educational mistake. But here's the thing about spin. It only works if you haven't been paying attention to the pattern. And sitting there in my kitchen, surrounded by the kind of honest morning light that makes everything look exactly like what it is instead of what you want it to be, I found myself thinking about all those other moments. The ones that had seemed individually forgivable, but collectively told a very different story about who I was in Sabrina's world. I thought about the galas where I'd gradually transformed from my husband Rowan to just Rowan, then to the guy standing next to Sabrina in photos, and finally to what felt like a prop in someone else's performance art. The way conversations would shift when I joined them, not because people were being deliberately exclusive, but because they genuinely forgot I might have something to contribute to discussions about art or travel or business or basically anything that mattered in their universe. I remembered that office party last Christmas, where Sabrina's business partner Marcus had made that crack about how I'd made it out of the trades, like I was some kind of success story for having the good sense to marry up. The way he'd said it, with that particular blend of condescension and congratulation, like I was a rescue dog who'd learned to sit on command. And Sabrina's reaction. Not correcting him, not defending me, just smoothly changing the subject like she was redirecting traffic around an accident. Then there was the Napa weekend with her college friends, where she'd offered to pay for my share if you can't swing it in front of everyone, like I was the broke friend who needed financial assistance to participate in their expensive bonding ritual. Never mind that I could afford the weekend just fine. It was the assumption that I couldn't, delivered with such casual certainty, that had stung. The way she'd made it sound like she was being generous instead of insulting. And God, the upgrade talk. The endless, well-meaning suggestions about how I could improve various aspects of my life to better fit into her world. The watch conversations, where somehow my perfectly functional Timex became a symbol of everything I wasn't quite getting right about being a successful person. The truck discussions, where my reliable F-150 was constantly being compared to sleeker, more expensive alternatives that would be more appropriate for someone in my position. The suit shopping expeditions, where I'd stand in stores that smelled like leather and ambition, while sales associates who made more in commission than I made in a month explained why I needed to invest in a wardrobe that reflects my aspirations. As if my aspiration was to look like I belonged in rooms where people spent more on lunch than most families spent on groceries. Each incident, taken alone, was completely forgivable. Relationships require compromise, right? People from different backgrounds need to learn each other's languages, adapt to each other's expectations. That's just how it works when you're building something together. But when you line them all up like evidence in a case file, they tell a different story. They form a map where I'm consistently placed below sea level, where every interaction reinforces the basic assumption that I'm the one who needs to change, adapt, upgrade, and improve to deserve my place in this relationship. The pattern was so clear I couldn't believe I'd missed it for 2 years. Or maybe I hadn't missed it. Maybe I'd just been telling myself it was temporary, that once Sabrina's friends got to know me better, once I learned the rules of their social game, once I proved myself worthy of belonging in their world, the dynamic would shift. But last night had made it crystal clear that I was never going to be anything more than a curiosity in Sabrina's life. The blue-collar guy she'd experimented with, like trying a new restaurant or taking a pottery class. Interesting for a while, maybe even fun, but ultimately not the kind of thing you build a future around. The really twisted part was that she probably did love me, in her way. But she loved me like you love a pet or a hobby, something that adds texture to your life without fundamentally changing who you are or what you want from the world. And sitting there in my kitchen, reading her messages about brand jokes and professional expectations and panic attacks, I realized something that felt both devastating and liberating. I deserved better than being someone's experiment in dating down. Evening came with that particular weight that settles over everything when you know you're about to have one of those conversations that changes the trajectory of your entire life. I'd spent the day working, rewiring a kitchen in a house where the previous owner had apparently learned electrical work from YouTube videos and a prayer, and the physical labor had been exactly what I needed. Nothing clears your head like 8 hours of solving problems that actually have solutions, where the right answer is always the right answer and nobody's trying to spin basic physics into a narrative about personal growth. When I got home, I almost didn't notice her at first. No silver dress this time, no dramatic lighting, no audience of 60 people hanging on her every word. Just Sabrina, sitting on the bench outside my building in a wool coat that probably cost more than my monthly truck payment, looking smaller somehow than I'd ever seen her. Her face was bare of the carefully applied makeup that usually made her look like she was ready for a magazine cover. And for a moment, she looked almost like the woman I'd married instead of the performance artist who'd eviscerated our relationship in front of her friends. "I'm sorry," she said as I approached the door, and the words came out flat and tired, like she'd been practicing them for hours, but they'd lost all their meaning somewhere along the way. I was cruel. I stopped walking and really looked at her for the first time in what felt like months. Without the social armor of her usual presentation, she looked vulnerable in a way that might have made me want to comfort her if I hadn't spent the last 24 hours realizing how thoroughly I'd been played. But vulnerability can be just another performance when you're dealing with someone who's made a career out of managing other people's perceptions. "Yes, you were," I said, because there was no point in pretending otherwise. Cruel was actually a pretty accurate word for what had happened at Le Jardin Atrium, though it didn't quite capture the calculated nature of it. The way she'd turned our marriage into entertainment for people who saw my humiliation as confirmation of their own superiority. She looked up at me with those eyes that had convinced me to take a chance on someone so far outside my usual orbit, and for a second I could see the woman who'd laughed at my jokes about electrical safety and fallen asleep reading in my workshop while I restored old radios. But I'd learned enough about performance over the past 2 years to recognize when someone was trying to manage a reaction instead of having an honest conversation. "Can we talk?" she asked, and I realized this was probably the first time in our relationship that she'd asked permission for anything instead of just assuming I'd go along with whatever she'd decided we were doing. I had one question for her, just one, and everything else was going to depend on how she answered it. Not whether she could spin it or explain it away or contextualize it within the framework of her social obligations, but whether she could tell me the truth without trying to manage the implications. "Before last night," I said, unlocking the door but not yet opening it, "had you ever thought of me as dating down?" The pause that followed was maybe 3 seconds long, but it contained our entire relationship. Every dinner party where I'd felt like an outsider, every suggestion about upgrades and improvements, every moment when I'd wondered if I was being too sensitive about the casual dismissiveness of her friends. 3 seconds where I watched her face cycle through surprise, calculation, and something that might have been resignation. "I thought we come from different worlds," she said finally, and I had to give her credit for not trying to dodge the question entirely. "That's a ranking," I said, and watched her flinch slightly as the words hit home. Because that's exactly what it was, not just an acknowledgement of different backgrounds, but a clear hierarchy where her world was automatically assumed to be superior to mine, where different became better than and worse than, without anyone having to explicitly make the comparison. "It changed," she insisted, and there was something desperate in her voice now, like she was trying to convince herself as much as me. "I fell in love with you." Maybe she had. Maybe she'd genuinely fallen in love with the idea of me, or with the way I made her feel, or with the novelty of dating someone who fixed things with his hands instead of moving money around on spreadsheets. But love that comes with conditions isn't really love. It's a transaction disguised as an emotion. "But you still needed the room to know you know better," I said, and watched her shoulders sag as the truth of it settled between us like a weight neither of us could lift. Because that's what last night had really been about, wasn't it? Not just humiliating me, but establishing her position in the social hierarchy for everyone to see. Proving to her friends that she understood the difference between experimenting with different types of people and actually building a life with someone beneath her station. Making sure everyone knew that whatever had happened between us, she was still one of them in all the ways that mattered. She offered fixes then, like she was presenting a business proposal instead of trying to save a marriage. Cut those friends out of her life, though we both knew she couldn't, because they weren't just friends, they were her entire professional and social ecosystem. A public apology, though we both knew that would just be another performance, another carefully crafted statement designed to manage perceptions rather than address the underlying problem. Couples therapy. Though what therapist was going to fix the fundamental issue that she saw our relationship as something that needed to be managed rather than lived. Meeting with her on-camera brand manager to reframe the narrative. And that one actually made me laugh, though there wasn't much humor in it. Because of course the solution involved more performance, more careful construction of the story. We were telling the world about who we were and what we meant to each other. Respect first, I told her, because that was the only thing that mattered anymore. Narrative later. Can we try? She asked, and I could hear the little girl in her voice. The person she'd been before she'd learned to turn every interaction into a strategic advantage. We can try honesty, I said. I'm not your prop or your lesson. If you want me, you defend me in the moment. Otherwise, you want the image of a man like me, not me. She cried then, real tears that smudged the little bit of makeup she was wearing and made her look human in a way I hadn't seen in months. But I didn't cry, because I was empty and certain in a way that felt like peace after months of confusion and self-doubt. We agreed to separate finances, to pause joint appearances, to sit with it. She left with her roses. A week passed, and it was amazing how much quieter the world became when you stopped trying to fit into spaces that were never designed for you in the first place. No constant buzz of text messages demanding immediate responses to manufactured crises. No calendar notifications for events where I'd spend 3 hours smiling and nodding while people discussed problems that could be solved by writing checks. No mental energy wasted on translating every conversation through the filter of, what do these people really think of me and how can I prove I belong here? Just silence. Blessed, honest silence that let me hear myself think for the first time in 2 years. The text messages from Sabrina had slowed to a trickle. Maybe 1 or 2 a day, instead of the constant stream of damage control and explanation that had flooded my phone immediately after the Lou Jardin atrium disaster. Fewer calls that went straight to voicemail. No more surprise appearances at my door with flowers and apologies that felt more like negotiation tactics than genuine remorse. But the real change wasn't what had stopped, it was what had started. A single email that arrived on Thursday morning, sent from Sabrina's official Veil and Verity account instead of her personal one, which told me immediately that this wasn't going to be another attempt at spinning our situation into something more palatable. The email contained a screenshot of a donation confirmation, $5,000 to the Metropolitan Trade Scholarship Fund, made in my name, not in our names, not as some joint gesture that would let her claim credit for my generosity, but specifically attributed to Rowan Blake. Below that was a private apology letter she'd sent to every guest from the birthday party. Not a public statement for social media consumption, but individual messages acknowledging that her behavior had been inappropriate and hurtful. No posts about personal growth or learning experiences. No Instagram stories about the importance of accountability in relationships. No carefully curated narrative about how even successful people make mistakes. And isn't it inspiring how we can all learn from our failures? Just action, taken quietly, without fanfare or credit or any attempt to turn her apology into content for her personal brand. I stared at that email for a long time, trying to figure out what angle she was working, what strategy this represented in her campaign to fix what had been broken between us. But the more I looked at it, the more it seemed like something I'd never seen from Sabrina before, a gesture that wasn't designed to manage anyone's perception of anything. Her mother Marcella sent exactly one message that week, a text so chilly it could have been used to preserve organ donations. I hope you're satisfied with the disruption you've caused to our family. Because of course, in Marcella's universe, the problem wasn't that her daughter had publicly humiliated her husband, but that I'd had the poor taste to react to it in a way that made things socially awkward for everyone else. Her father Graham sent nothing at all, which was somehow more telling than any message could have been. The man who'd spent 2 years testing my handshake and measuring my worth against whatever criteria rich fathers use to evaluate their daughters' questionable romantic choices had apparently decided I wasn't worth the effort of active disapproval anymore. I'd been categorized, filed away, and forgotten with the efficiency of someone who'd built an empire by knowing when to cut his losses. But Harper surprised me. Harper, who delivered that first toast about Sabrina's brilliance and kicked off the whole evening of celebration that had turned into my public execution, sent a message that actually sounded like it came from a human being instead of a public relations algorithm. I've been silent too long, and I'm sorry. What happened at the party wasn't okay, and I should have said something in the moment instead of laughing along. You didn't deserve that. It wasn't much, but it was something. An acknowledgement that at least one person in that room had recognized the cruelty for what it was, even if she hadn't found the courage to speak up when it might have mattered. Sometimes that's all you can ask for, someone willing to admit they watched you get thrown under the bus and did nothing to stop it. I met my crew for lunch at Murphy's Diner on Friday, the kind of place where the coffee comes in actual ceramic mugs and nobody cares if your work boots are muddy or your hands are stained with electrical tape residue. Mac, who'd been with me since I started the business, took one look at my face and clapped me on the back hard enough to rattle my teeth. "You left with dignity," he said, like that settled everything that needed settling. Takes balls to walk away clean when everyone's expecting you to make a scene. We didn't talk about Sabrina or the party or any of the drama that had been consuming my life for the past week. We talked about the commercial job we'd landed for next month, the new apprentice we might need to hire, whether the Phillies had any chance of not breaking our hearts again this season. Normal conversation between normal people about normal problems that could be solved with effort and skill instead of requiring a committee of image consultants and crisis management specialists. I was sleeping deeper than I had in months. No more lying awake wondering if I'd said the wrong thing at dinner or failed to laugh at the right moment during someone's story about their second home in the Hamptons. No more anxiety dreams about showing up to fancy events in the wrong clothes or accidentally revealing how little I knew about wine pairings or contemporary art theory. I was pricing a bigger shop lease, looking at spaces where my crew could spread out and maybe take on larger projects without having to worry about disturbing neighbors who thought the sound of honest work was somehow beneath the dignity of their gentrified neighborhood. For the first time in 2 years, I was making plans based on what I wanted instead of what would look appropriate to people who measured success by how well you performed belonging in their exclusive little world. I was choosing peace over proximity, and it felt like coming home after being lost in a foreign country where I'd never quite learned the language. Maybe Sabrina and I would rebuild something, slowly, with proof instead of promises, with actions instead of explanations. Maybe we'd find a way to love each other without one of us having to disappear into the other's expectations. Maybe she'd learn to defend me before the laughter started instead of managing the damage after it was too late. Or maybe we wouldn't. Maybe 2 years of marriage had taught us that some differences can't be bridged by good intentions and couples therapy. Maybe love isn't always enough when it comes with conditions and hierarchies and the constant need to prove your worth the effort. Either way, I was done buying seats at tables that billed me for my own humiliation. The night I put that $100 bill on the linen and walked out of Le Jardin atrium wasn't about money. It was a receipt for self-respect, proof that I knew the difference between being included and being tolerated. Next time someone raises a glass to toast clarity, I hope it's because we figured out how to protect each other out loud, before the laughter starts, before the bill comes, before something good breaks into pieces that can't be put back together. But if not, at least I'll know I tried to build something real instead of just performing happiness for an audience that was never going to applaud anyway.